Let's talk about the future of the tourism industry. Joining us now is World Travel and Tourism Council CEO Julia Simpson. Julia, thank you so much for joining us. So why is the WTTC bullish on the recovery of the Philippine tourism sector?
Well, Rico, we've got a really good story to tell here in the Philippines. The Philippines is unique in the sense that 20% of the population here are employed either directly or indirectly through travel and tourism. And of course, when COVID struck, it has been hit really hard. But we've just heard there from Secretary Bernadette Romulo, and the government has done actually a really, really good job because they've gone ahead of the rest of the countries in Asia Pacific, and they're opening up and they're welcoming back tourists. And we've published today some new numbers that show that the Philippines is poised for a very strong recovery.
Yes, I've seen those numbers. Really very interesting data that you published, and you are really very upbeat on Philippine tourism. But what are still the challenges and risks, Julia, in revitalizing the local tourism sector?
Yes, as we emerge from this pandemic, we always think we've nearly come out of it, and then something like Delta strikes or Omicron strikes. But I actually really believe now that we are at the end of two really very, very difficult years. The majority of the people in Philippines and Asia Pacific are now vaccinated. That is your very, very best defense against this illness. And governments, particularly the Philippine government, are now cautiously but carefully opening up. Obviously, I'm here speaking to you in the Philippines without a mask, but I'm on my own in a room, and so very, very respectful of the limited precautions that are still being put in place. But the really, really good news for Asia Pacific is that over the next 10 years, WTTC, we're estimating that there's going to be an extra 126 million jobs worldwide created, brand new jobs in travel and tourism. And Asia Pacific is going to benefit from 77 million of those. So it's going to be huge. And in the Philippines, we're looking at an extra 3 million jobs. You've got to remember that in the Philippines, this business, travel and tourism, was worth $93 billion before the pandemic struck. And the good news is that might not be completely recovered this year. You might get back to about 8.4, 8.5 billion, but we're expecting a full recovery by 2023.
Right. Okay.
And then over the next 10 years, as I say, travel and tourism in Asia Pacific and in the Philippines is actually going to outstrip growth.
The numbers that you mentioned, Julia, are very encouraging, especially not only for the Philippine tourism industry, but for Asia's tourism sector as well. But of course, over the past year, when everyone was starting to get vaccinated, there was always this talk about a health certification document. Should there still be, in your view, a global health passport, or is there no need for it anymore?
Yeah, I think that now people are vaccinated, what would be really helpful is for people to have inside their mobile phone, if you like, their digital travel documents, a screen grab of your vaccination certificate. And in fact, any other health data that's required. I'm old enough to remember that when you travel around the world, if you visited countries, they might have requirements for you to have a scarlet fever jab, for example. I remember that very clearly. And we had to produce a little bit of paper. Well, of course, the world's come on leaps and bounds in terms of digitalization. And now we can have it all in our phone. There are a lot of countries now where literally at the touch of a button, you can just show everything that's required. And I think that really is the next step, because it's not helpful arriving at an airport and having to rummage around in your bag, trying to find different bits of paper. It causes queues. So let's get this digital. And I think that's probably the next big challenge for governments globally and governments here in the Philippines.
Julia, what about the rising price of aviation fuel? Could this put a damper on all this excitement about the reopening of borders and the rise of the tourism industry?
Well, I agree with you, Rico. You know, we're seeing record levels prices in terms of Brent crude, and that transfers into prices for jet fuel, which ultimately will mean increased costs in terms of flying. But what we're actually seeing at the minute is there's so much pent-up demand for people to travel, and probably people have been saving some money, you know, while the 2 years has been happening, and people are traveling. The booking data that we got is very, very strong. You know, we are seeing in some countries literally 180% increase in booking data. So despite that pressure on costs for companies, which ultimately does get transferred into price rises, but despite that, we are seeing people, you know, getting out their wallets and booking a holiday. And I think after the 2 years we've all been through, what a better place to come to than the Philippines.
It's all about revenge travel, and thank you so much for promoting the Philippines to the world. Julia Simpson, the CEO of WTTC.